The transport ship shuddered as it entered the atmosphere of New Meridia. Ambassador Zethkar pressed his long fingers against the small window and watched the planet's surface grow larger below him. Smoke columns rose from scattered points across, the landscape like dark fingers reaching toward the sky. Even from this height, he could see the scars of war carved into the earth. Zethkar had seen many battlefields in his 40 years of service to the Galactic Council. The Valanian people were known throughout the galaxy for their ability to read minds and settle disputes peacefully. That was why the Council always sent them to investigate reports of war crimes. But this assignment felt different. The reports about human military tactics had been disturbing, even by galactic standards. The pilot's voice crackled through the intercom. "Ambassador, we will land at New Meridia Colony Port in 5 minutes. The humans have cleared us for landing." Zethkar nodded and gathered his recording equipment. His mission was simple: document human war crimes, report back to the Council, and recommend sanctions. The humans had been fighting the Krex Empire for 3 years now, and reports suggested they were using methods that violated every civilized rule of warfare. The ship touched down with a gentle bump. Through the window, Zethkar could see the spaceport. It looked nothing like the clean, organized facilities he was used to on other worlds. Concrete barriers surrounded the landing pads. Armed humans patrolled the perimeter. What had once been a civilian spaceport now looked like a military fortress. The airlock hissed open, and Zethkar stepped onto New Meridia soil for the first time. The air smelled of smoke and something else he could not identify. A strange tension seemed to hang in the atmosphere, making his skin crawl. A human approached him. The man was tall and broad-shouldered, with short gray hair and lines around his eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights. His uniform was clean but worn, and several scars crossed his face and hands. "Ambassador Zethkar," the human said, extending his hand. "I'm Captain Jake Morrison, Colonial Defense Force. Welcome to New Meridia." Zethkar studied the human's mind briefly, a habit of his people. What he found surprised him. Instead of the brutal thoughts he expected from a war, criminal, he sensed deep sadness, exhaustion, and something else. Fear. Not fear for himself, but fear for others. "Captain Morrison," Zethkar replied, shaking the offered hand. "I appreciate you meeting me personally." Morrison's smile was thin. "Not many aliens visit us these days. Most prefer to stay away from active war zones." He gestured toward a military vehicle nearby. "I'll be your escort while you're here. Fair warning, though, Ambassador. War isn't pretty, and the way humans fight might shock you." As they walked toward the vehicle, Zethkar noticed more details about the spaceport. Children played near one of the buildings, but they stopped their games to watch the soldiers pass. Their eyes held a wariness that no child should possess. Women and elderly men worked alongside the soldiers, loading supplies and maintaining equipment. Everyone seemed to have a job. Everyone seemed to be part of the war effort. "How long has New Meridia been under attack?" Zethkar asked as they climbed into the vehicle. Morrison started the engine. 3 years, 2 months, and 16 days. The precise answer suggested he had been counting every single day. "The Krex hit us without warning. No declaration of war, no demands, no negotiation attempts. They just started killing." The vehicle moved through the colony's streets. Zethkar saw buildings with patched walls where weapons had damaged them. Some structures had been completely rebuilt. Gardens grew in spaces that had once been parking lots, and children attended school in buildings that doubled as emergency shelters. "The Galactic Council received reports about your military tactics," Zethkar said carefully. "Some species are concerned about the methods your people are using." Morrison was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, His voice was flat. What methods would those be, Ambassador? Unconventional warfare. Attacks on non-military targets. Use of prohibited weapons. Refusal to follow standard rules of engagement. Morrison laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Standard rules of engagement. Right. He turned the vehicle onto a dirt road that led away from the colony center. Tell me something, Ambassador. When you investigate war crimes, do you usually start by talking to the victims or the perpetrators? The question caught Zethkar off guard. We gather evidence from all sources. Good. Then you'll want to see the memorial. They drove for another 10 minutes before Morrison stopped the vehicle beside a large field. Zethkar got out and followed. The captain toward what looked like a garden. As they got closer, he realized what he was seeing. Thousands of small markers stretched across the field, each one bearing a name and date. 15,347 people, Morrison said quietly. That's how many civilians the Krex killed in the first 6 months of the war. Men, women, children, elderly, sick, healthy, didn't matter to them. Zethkar walked among the markers, reading the names. Sarah Wilson, age 7. Robert Hayes, age 83. Linda Foster, age 34. The dates were all within the same 6-month period Morrison had mentioned. The Krex don't take prisoners, Morrison continued. They don't negotiate. They don't accept surrender. They kill every human they find, civilian or military. Their goal isn't to win territory or resources. Their goal is to make sure no human remains alive on any world they attack. The captain stopped beside one particular marker. This is my daughter, Emma. She was 12. The Krex found her school during their second attack on the colony. They killed every child and teacher inside. Zethkar felt the captain's pain through his mental abilities. The grief was overwhelming, but underneath it was something harder. Determination, a refusal to give up that bordered on the desperate. I'm sorry for your loss, Zethkar said. Morrison nodded. Thank you. But I didn't bring you here for sympathy. I brought you here so you'd understand something important before you judge us. They returned to the vehicle and continued toward the military base. The landscape around them showed more signs of the war. Burned forests, cratered fields, abandoned farmhouses with walls blown away. But Zethkar also saw signs of recovery. New growth in the burned areas, rebuilt bridges, fields being planted again. How do you continue? Zethkar asked. How do you? Keep going after losing so much? Morrison glanced at him. Because giving up means they win. And if they win here, they'll move on to the next human world, then the next. They won't stop until every human in the galaxy is dead. He paused. The thing is, Ambassador, we've learned something about the Krex that the rest of the galaxy doesn't know yet. What's that? They don't just want to kill humans. We're just first on their list. Before Zethkar could ask what that meant, they arrived at Forward Operating Base Titan. The military base was larger than he had expected, with defensive walls, guard towers, and buildings that looked like they had been built to withstand heavy attacks. Soldiers moved with purpose between the structures, and the whole place hummed with activity. A young woman in uniform approached their vehicle. She was small and looked barely old enough to be a soldier, but her eyes held the same hardness Zethkar had seen in Morrison's. Ambassador, this is Lieutenant Amy Foster, our intelligence officer, Morrison said. She be briefing you on the enemy. Foster saluted briefly. Ambassador, welcome to Base Titan. Captain Morrison told me you're here to investigate our tactics. That's correct. Foster nodded. Then you'll need to understand what we're fighting against. The Krex aren't like other species in the galaxy. They don't think like individuals. They don't negotiate. They don't show mercy. And they have advantages that make traditional military tactics useless. As they walked toward the base's main building, Zethkar realized that his mission might be more complicated than he had expected. These humans didn't seem like the bloodthirsty monsters described in the council reports. They seemed like people, pushed to their absolute limits, fighting for their very survival. But he had seen desperate people before. What made humans different? What had they done that was so terrible that multiple species had filed complaints with the Galactic Council? He was about to find out. Dawn came early to New Meridia, and with it came the sound of boots on concrete. Zethkar had barely slept in the small quarters Captain Morrison had assigned him. The sounds of the military base never stopped. Soldiers moved supplies, maintained weapons, and prepared for whatever the day might bring. A knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. "Ambassador, we're moving out in 10 minutes," came Morrison's voice from the hallway. Zethkar gathered his recording equipment and stepped outside. The morning air was crisp and carried the smell of cooking food from the base kitchen. Soldiers were already lined up for breakfast, their weapons never far from their hands. Morrison waited for him near a group of 4 soldiers. "Ambassador, meet Sergeant Danny Cole's reconnaissance unit. They'll be taking you on patrol today." Sergeant Cole was a stocky man with calloused hands and dirt under his fingernails. He looked more like a farmer than a soldier, but his eyes held the same alertness Zethkar had seen in other humans on the base. "Pleasure to meet you, Ambassador," Cole said. "Fair warning, though, we're not going on a sightseeing tour. We got reports of Krex movement near the civilian evacuation routes." The other members of Cole's unit introduced themselves. Corporal Lisa Hawkins was a tall woman with steady hands who carried a long-range rifle. Her voice was soft, but her gaze was sharp and calculating. Private Kevin Brooks looked barely out of his teenage years, but he moved with the confidence of someone who had seen real combat. The 4th member was Private Janet Murphy, a medic who also carried a rifle. She smiled at Zethkar, but he noticed she kept checking her medical supplies and ammunition with equal attention. "The plan is simple," Cole explained as they walked toward their vehicle. "We patrol the northern sector, check for Krex scouts, and report back. If we're lucky, we don't see anything. If we're not lucky, well, you'll get to see how humans really fight." The vehicle was armored, but still looked like it had been built from spare parts. Welded metal plates covered the windows, leaving only narrow slits to see through. The interior smelled of oil, sweat, and something else Zethkar couldn't identify. "That smell is fear," Hawkins said quietly, noticing his expression. "Every human who's ever been in combat knows it. It's not shame to be afraid. It's smart." They drove through the colony's outer defenses and into the wilderness beyond. The landscape was beautiful in the morning light, with rolling hills covered in tall grass and scattered trees. But Zethkar noticed that every hill could hide enemies. Every tree line could conceal an ambush. "Tell me about the Krex," Zethkar said. "What makes them so different from other species?" Cole answered without taking his eyes off the road. "They're big, for starters. About 6 feet tall, covered in natural armor that can stop most small arms fire. They're strong enough to tear a human apart with their bare hands, and they're smart. But that's not the worst part," Brooks added. "The worst part is they don't think like individuals. They share thoughts somehow, like a hive mind. Kill one, and the others know immediately. They coordinate attacks perfectly, because they're all connected." Murphy nodded. "And they don't feel pain the way we do. I've seen Krex keep fighting with wounds that would drop a human instantly. They just don't stop." The vehicle slowed as they approached a ridge overlooking a valley. Cole stopped and gestured for everyone to get out. They moved quietly through the grass, keeping low. "There," Hawkins whispered, pointing toward the valley below. Zethkar followed her gaze and saw them. Krex soldiers moving in perfect formation across the valley floor. They were exactly as the humans had described, tall and covered in dark armor-like skin. But seeing them in person was different. They moved with a purpose that seemed almost mechanical, never breaking formation, never hesitating. How many? Cole asked. Hawkins studied them through her rifle scope. 37. Standard patrol formation. They're heading toward evacuation route, Charlie. That's where the Johnson family and their neighbors are supposed to be traveling today, Murphy said quietly. Cole was silent for a moment, thinking. Jethkar could see the calculation in his eyes. 4 humans against 37 Krex. In any normal military situation, the humans would retreat and call for backup. But there wasn't time for backup to arrive before the Krex reached the evacuation route. We stopped them here, Cole decided. Sergeant, we're outnumbered 9-1, Brooks pointed out. Numbers don't matter if we fight smart, Cole replied. Ambassador, you're about to see something that might disturb you. Humans don't fight the way other species do. We can't match the Krex in strength or armor, so we use other methods. What happened next shocked Jethkar to his core. Instead of engaging the Krex in direct combat, Cole's unit began what they called preparation. They moved through the area around the Krex patrol route, setting up devices that Cole had made from farming equipment and construction materials. Improvised explosives, Cole explained quietly as he placed a device near a tree. Made from fertilizer and old construction charges. Not elegant, but effective. Hawkins positioned herself on a distant hill with her rifle. I'll take out their leaders first. Without coordination, they'll be confused for a few seconds. Brooks and Murphy worked together to create what they called channels. They used fallen logs and stones to guide the Krex movement in specific directions toward the areas where Cole had placed his devices. This is not honorable combat, Jethkar said, disturbed by what he was witnessing. Double quotes. No, it's not, Cole agreed. But honorable. Combat is a luxury we can't afford. Those Krex are going to kill every human they find on that evacuation route. Men, women, children, elderly. They don't care about honor. The Krex patrol entered the valley section where the humans had prepared their trap. Hawkins fired first, her rifle making a sharp crack that echoed across the valley. The lead Krex dropped instantly, and the others immediately began scanning for threats. But they were looking for direct confrontation, not the guerrilla tactics the humans employed. Cole's explosives detonated in sequence, creating chaos in the Aussie. Krex formation. Several fell, while others were thrown off balance. Brooks appeared from cover, not to fight directly, but to throw smoke grenades that confused the Krex even more. Murphy used her medical knowledge in reverse, targeting specific weak points in Krex anatomy that she had learned from studying captured equipment. The battle was over in less than 5 minutes. The Krex patrol was eliminated, but not through. Heroic charges, or noble single combat. The humans had used deception, traps, and psychological warfare to defeat an enemy that was individually superior to them. Effective, Jethkar said, though he felt disturbed by the methods. Necessary, Cole corrected. Ambassador, I used to build houses before the war. Hawkins taught school. Brooks was studying agriculture. Murphy was training to be a doctor. None of us wanted to become killers. They gathered their equipment and prepared to leave. As they walked back to their vehicle, Hawkins spoke quietly. You know what the Krex do to prisoners, Ambassador? Jethkar shook his head. They don't take any. Ever. They kill everyone they capture, usually slowly. They've never accepted a surrender, never negotiated a prisoner exchange, never shown mercy to wounded soldiers or civilians. That's why we fight the way we do, Murphy added. When your enemy shows no mercy, you can't afford to follow rules they ignore. As they drove back toward the base, Jethkar found himself thinking about what he had witnessed. The humans had been efficient, clever, and completely ruthless. But they had also saved the lives of civilians who would have been killed if the Krex patrol had reached the evacuation route. "The Galactic Council calls these war crimes," he said. Cole looked at him in the mirror. "The Galactic Council has never faced an enemy like the Krex. When they do, they'll understand why we fight." "This way." "What do you mean?" "The Krex aren't just at war with humans, Ambassador. We're just the first species they decided to exterminate. When they're done with us, they'll move on to the next species. Then the next. They won't stop until every non-Krex in the galaxy is dead." The vehicle fell silent as they returned to base. Zethkar stared out at the landscape, processing what he had learned. The humans were using tactics that violated every civilized rule of warfare. But they were fighting an enemy that had abandoned civilization entirely. For the first time since arriving on New Meridia, Zethkar began to wonder if the humans might be right. The alarm woke Zethkar from an uneasy sleep. Red lights flashed in his quarters as the base's emergency system activated. He could hear soldiers running in the corridors outside, their boots pounding against the metal floors. Captain Morrison's voice came through the intercom system. "All personnel to battle stations. We have confirmed Krex movement in Sector 7. This is not a drill." Zethkar dressed quickly and stepped into the hallway. The base had transformed overnight. Soldiers were moving with urgent purpose, checking weapons and equipment. The casual atmosphere he had observed before was gone, replaced by focused intensity. "Major." Alex Carter found him near the command center. Carter was different from the other humans Zethkar had met so far. He was tall and thin, with careful eyes that seemed to analyze everything he saw. His uniform was clean and pressed, but his hands bore the same scars Zethkar had noticed on other soldiers. "Ambassador, I understand you want to observe our operations," Carter said. "Today, you'll get that chance. We've received intelligence about Krex prisoners being held in Sector 7. We're going to get them out." They walked toward the briefing room where soldiers were gathering. Zethkar noticed something different about this group. They moved more quietly than regular soldiers, and their equipment looked specialized. These were not the same type of troops he had observed on patrol. "This is Captain Nina Rodriguez," Carter said, introducing a compact woman with steady hands and alert eyes. "She leads our special operations team." Rodriguez nodded at Zethkar. "Ambassador, fair warning. What we're about to do might look brutal to an outside observer. But those prisoners have been in Krex hands for 6 days. Every hour we wait means more of them die." The briefing began with satellite images of a Krex compound 20 miles from the base. The structure looked like a fortress, with high walls and guard towers. But Zethkar could see something else in the images that made his stomach turn. Smoke was rising from several buildings inside the compound. "Intelligence suggests they're holding 43 human prisoners," Rodriguez explained. "Mostly civilians who were captured during the attack on Riverside Settlement. The smoke you see is coming from their research facility." "Research facility?" Zethkar asked. Carter's expression grew dark. "The Krex don't just kill humans, Ambassador. They study us. They want to understand how we think, how we fight, how we die. They use prisoners for experiments." The team that would conduct the rescue was small. Only 8 soldiers, including Rodriguez. Each one carried specialized equipment that Zethkar didn't recognize. Their weapons looked different from standard military gear, and they moved with a precision that suggested extensive training. "How do 8 soldiers assault a fortress defended by hundreds of Krex?" Zethkar asked. "We don't assault it," Rodriguez replied. "We infiltrate it. The Krex expect direct attacks because that's how most galactic species fight. They don't expect humans to use stealth, deception, and their own weaknesses against them." The journey to the compound took 2 hours in specially modified vehicles that ran almost silently. Along the way, Rodriguez explained her background. "I used to be a surgeon before the war," she said. "Emergency room, trauma cases. I learned how to work fast under pressure, how to make life or death decisions in seconds. Turns out those skills transfer well to this kind of work." As they approached the target area, the team split up. Zethkar stayed with Rodriguez and 2 other soldiers as they moved through the forest surrounding the compound. The other team members took different routes, each with specific objectives. "The Krex have excellent hearing and smell," Rodriguez whispered as they crept through the undergrowth. "But they have blind spots in their vision, and their armor makes them overconfident. We use those weaknesses." What happened next amazed Zethkar. Instead of attacking the compound directly, Rodriguez's team began what they called system disruption. Using knowledge gained from studying captured Krex technology, they targeted the compound's power supply, communications, and surveillance. Systems. Sergeant Mary Powell, a demolitions expert, disabled the perimeter sensors using charges so small they were barely visible. Her work was precise and silent, each explosive placed to cause maximum disruption with minimum noise. Private Tony Clark, a former electrician, tapped into the compound's power grid and created cascading failures that left entire sections in darkness. He worked with tools that looked like they had been improvised from civilian equipment. "We learned early in the war that Krex technology has the same vulnerabilities as any other system," Rodriguez explained quietly. "Interrupt the power flow, jam the communications, create chaos in their information networks, and even superior. Forces become vulnerable. The infiltration phase took an hour." By the time Rodriguez's team approached the compound walls, the Krex defenders were dealing with multiple system failures and couldn't coordinate their response effectively. But what? Zethkar saw inside the compound changed his understanding of the war completely. The Krex had not simply captured human prisoners. They had been conducting experiments that were beyond anything he had imagined. In one building, they found humans who had been subjected to biological testing. The Krex were studying human pain responses, testing different methods of killing, and analyzing human psychology under extreme stress. Some prisoners had been kept alive for days, while the Krex learned about human anatomy. Dr. Paul Harrison was among the prisoners they rescued. He had been a xenobiologist before his capture, and his knowledge of alien species had made him valuable to the Krex researchers. But valuable meant he had been kept alive longer, which meant he had witnessed more of their experiments. "They're not just trying to kill us efficiently," Harrison whispered to Rodriguez as they helped him walk. "They're learning everything they can about human biology and psychology. They want to understand what makes us fight so hard." The rescue operation's most difficult moment came when they found Sergeant Mary Powell from Cole's original unit. She had been captured during a previous mission and had been held for 3 days. The Krex had been using her to test human breaking points. Powell was barely conscious, but when she saw Rodriguez, she grabbed her arm. "Don't let them take me back," she whispered. "I can't go through that again." Rodriguez looked at the situation. Around them, Krex reinforcements were approaching their position. The team could escape, but carrying Powell would slow them down and probably result in everyone being captured. Powell seemed to understand the situation. "Leave me behind," she ordered. "Get the others out." "We don't leave people behind," Rodriguez said firmly. "That's an order, Captain. I'm still your superior officer." What happened next showed Zethkar the true depth of human determination. Instead of abandoning Powell or risking everyone's lives trying to carry her, Rodriguez made a different choice. Powell had kept a grenade during her capture, hidden in her boot. She looked at Rodriguez and nodded. "Blow the tunnel entrance after. You get through. I'll make sure they can't follow." The team evacuated the other prisoners through a maintenance tunnel that led outside the compound walls. As they reached safety, they heard the explosion behind them. Powell had detonated her grenade in the tunnel entrance, collapsing it and preventing Krex pursuit. Her sacrifice saved 42 other human lives. During the journey back to base, Zeth-Kar rode in the medical vehicle with the rescued prisoners. Dr. Harrison, despite his injuries, was eager to share what he had learned during his captivity. "The Krex aren't just at war with humans," Harrison said quietly. "They've been planning this for years. They have files on dozens of other species. Biological profiles, psychological assessments, military capabilities. They're preparing to exterminate every non-Krex species in the galaxy." "How do you know this?" Zeth-Kar asked. "Because they told me. They wanted to understand human fear responses. So they showed me their plans. They're going to do to every species what they're doing to humans right now." The medical vehicle fell silent except for the sound of the engine. As Zeth-Kar looked at the injured humans around him and realized something that changed his entire perspective on the war. These people were not fighting for conquest or resources. They were fighting for the survival of their species, and unknowingly, for the survival of every other species in the galaxy. The brutal tactics he had witnessed were not evidence of human savagery, but proof of their absolute refusal to let evil triumph. Rodriguez sat beside him, cleaning her weapons after the mission. "You asked earlier how 8 soldiers could assault a fortress," she said quietly. "The answer is that we don't fight like soldiers. We fight like people who have nothing left to lose and everything to protect." As they approached the base, Zeth-Kar understood that he was not observing war crimes. He was witnessing the galaxy's first and possibly only effective response to a threat that other species couldn't even imagine. The humans fought like demons because they had seen true evil, and they were willing to become monsters to prevent that evil from spreading to others. The emergency meeting was called at dawn. Zeth-Kar had barely slept after witnessing the rescue operation the day before. The images of what the Krex had done to human prisoners kept running through his mind. Now, as he sat in the base's command center, he could see the same haunted look in the eyes of every human officer present. Colonel Sam Martinez stood at the head of the table, looking older than his years. His uniform was perfect, but his hands shook slightly as he spread out intelligence reports. Beside him sat Dr. Ellen Hayes, the colony's chief scientist. She was a small woman with gray hair and tired eyes, but when she spoke, everyone listened. "The situation has changed," Martinez began. "Our reconnaissance satellites have detected massive Krex fleet movements. They're preparing for what appears to be a final assault on New Meridia." The holographic display in the center of the table showed the planet from space. Red dots marked Krex ship positions, and there were far more of them than Zeth-Kar expected. Hundreds of vessels surrounded the planet, with more arriving every hour. "How long do we have?" asked Captain Morrison. 72 hours, Dr. Hayes replied. "Maybe less. Our current defenses can't stop a force this size. Traditional military tactics will only delay them by a few hours at most." Lieutenant Commander Rick Turner, a thin man with worried eyes, leaned forward. "We all know what this means. If they take New Meridia, every human on this planet dies, and then they move on to the next human world." Turner had been a philosophy professor before the war, specializing in ethics and moral reasoning. The transformation from academic to military strategist had been hard on him, and it showed in his face. "There is another option," Dr. Hayes said quietly, "but it's not one we can take lightly." She activated another display, this one showing technical specifications that Zeth-Kar didn't fully understand. But he could see the reactions of the humans around the table. Some looked horrified, others determined, all of them conflicted. Project Prometheus, Martinez said. We've been developing it for 6 months, hoping we'd never have to use it. Dr. Hayes began explaining the project in terms that even Zethkar could understand. Using captured Krex technology and human innovation, the human scientists had created weapons that went far beyond conventional military equipment. The first component is a biological agent, Hayes explained. It targets specific proteins found only in Krex physiology. It's designed to be completely harmless to other species, but lethal to the Krex. Turner shifted uncomfortably in his chair. It's essentially a plague weapon. Once released, it would spread through their entire force within days. The second component involves environmental manipulation, Hayes continued. We can turn their own technology against them. Their ships rely on specific atmospheric conditions. We can create chemical reactions that make their vessels uninhabitable. The third component was the most disturbing. Self-replicating machines that would hunt Krex forces autonomously. The machines would learn from each encounter, becoming more effective over time. These weapons violate every treaty the Galactic Council has ever written, Zethkar said. Yes, they do, Martinez agreed. But the Galactic Council has never faced extinction. Dr. Hayes brought up another display, this one showing casualty projections. If we fight conventionally, we lose. Every simulation shows the same result. The Krex overwhelm our defenses, kill every human on New Meridia, and then move on to the next target. But if we use Prometheus, Morrison asked, we win. Completely. The Krex fleet is destroyed, and their technology becomes useless against similar attacks in the future. The room fell silent. Zethkar could feel the mental anguish of every human present. They were being asked to choose between extinction and becoming the monsters that other species feared. Turner spoke first. I've spent my entire adult life studying ethics and morality. Everything I believed about right and wrong says we shouldn't do this. But, Martinez prompted, but I've also seen what the Krex do to prisoners. I've read Dr. Harrison's reports about their plans for other species. Sometimes there are no good choices, only necessary ones. Over the next several hours, Zethkar watched as humanity's leadership wrestled with the most difficult decision any species could face. They brought in officers from every unit, scientists from every department, even civilian leaders from the colony. The debate was intense and emotional. Some argued that using such weapons would make humans no better than the Krex. Others pointed out that the Krex had never shown mercy and would certainly not show any if their positions were reversed. Captain Rodriguez, still recovering from the rescue mission, spoke for many of the soldiers. We've already crossed lines we never thought we'd cross. We've used tactics that shame us. But we did it to save lives. This is just the logical next step. Dr. Hayes revealed more disturbing information during the debate. The Krex aren't just planning to attack humans. We've decoded some of their communications. They have detailed invasion plans for 17 other species, including several members of the Galactic Council. She showed translated documents that outlined systematic extermination campaigns. The Krex viewed all non-insectoid life as contamination that needed to be cleansed from the galaxy. Their war against humanity was just the beginning of a much larger genocide. Why did they start with humans? Zethkar asked. Because we're isolated, Martinez replied. Humans are new to galactic civilization. We don't have the alliances and treaties that protect other species. We were the perfect test case for their methods. The final decision came down to a vote. Every senior officer, every department head, every civilian leader had a voice. Zethkar watched as these people, who had already sacrificed so much, prepared to sacrifice their moral certainty as well. The vote was not unanimous, but it was decisive. Project Prometheus would be implemented if the Krex attacked as the meeting broke up. Zethkar found himself walking with Turner toward the base perimeter. The professor-turned-strategist looked exhausted. "Do you think we're doing the right thing?" Turner asked. "I don't know," Sethkar replied honestly. "But I understand why you're doing it." "That's more than I hoped for," Turner said. "When this war started, I thought there were clear lines between good and evil. The Krex were evil for attacking civilians. We were good for defending them. But war doesn't leave room for such simple distinctions." They stopped at the memorial field where Morrison had taken Sethkar on his first day. New markers had been added since then, including one for Sergeant Powell. "Every name here represents a choice," Turner said. "Someone chose to fight instead of surrender. Someone chose to sacrifice themselves for others. We're making the same choice, just on a larger scale." That evening, the Krex attack began. Sethkar watched from the base's command center as enemy ships descended through the atmosphere. The defensive systems activated automatically, but everyone knew they were vastly outnumbered. The first wave of attacks hit the outer settlements. Communications were quickly jammed, but the last reports were grim. The Krex were following their standard pattern of complete extermination. "They're not taking prisoners," reported the communications officer. "No surrender attempts, no negotiations. They're killing everyone they find." Martinez looked around the command center at his officers. "Any objections to implementing Prometheus?" There were none. Dr. Hayes activated the systems her team had spent months preparing. Across New Meridia, hidden facilities began releasing the biological agents into the atmosphere. Environmental modification systems started changing the planets. Atmospheric composition in ways that would be harmless to humans but deadly to Krex, the self-replicating hunter machines, launched from concealed bunkers, immediately beginning their programmed mission to seek and destroy Krex forces. "How long until we see results?" Martinez asked. 6 hours for the biological agent," Hayes replied. 12 hours for full environmental effects. The hunter machines will begin engaging targets immediately. Sethkar realized he was witnessing something that would change galactic history. Humanity was unleashing weapons that could potentially spread beyond this planet, beyond this system. They were taking a step that could not be undone, but as he watched the humans around him, he saw no joy in their decision. Only grim determination and the terrible certainty that they had no other choice. The battle for New Meridia's survival had begun, and with it, humanity's transformation into something the galaxy had never seen before. The first effects of Project Prometheus became visible 6 hours after the Krex attack began. Sethkar stood in the command center, watching the tactical displays as red dots representing enemy forces began disappearing from the screens one by one. "Biological agent is working faster than expected," Dr. Hayes reported. "Krex ground forces are showing signs of system failure. Their communication networks are breaking down." Outside the command center windows, Sethkar could see the sky filled with smoke and fire. Krex ships were falling from orbit, their atmospheric systems failing as the environmental modifications took effect. The hunter machines moved like deadly shadows across the battlefield, systematically destroying enemy equipment and personnel. "It's working," Colonel Martinez said quietly, "but at what cost?" The cost was becoming clear as reports came in from across the planet. The weapons humanity had unleashed were more effective than anyone had imagined. The Krex forces were not just being defeated, they were being completely eliminated. No survivors, no retreat, no mercy. Captain Morrison approached Sethkar with a troubled expression. "Ambassador, we need you to see something." Dr. Harrison found something in the Krex communication systems before they went down. They walked to the intelligence section where Dr. Harrison was working with captured Krex equipment. His hands were still shaking from his time as a prisoner, but his mind was sharp and focused. "I've been analyzing their communication networks," Harrison explained. "The Krex use quantum entanglement for instantaneous communication across galactic distances. But there's something else in their data streams. He activated a display showing complex data patterns. These are not just military communications. They're biological and psychological profiles of other species, detailed invasion plans, timetables for systematic extermination. Zethkar studied the information, his blood growing cold as he understood what he was seeing. How many species? 47 that we've identified so far, Harrison replied, including several founding members of the Galactic Council. The data was overwhelming. The Krex had been planning a galaxy-wide genocide for decades. They had studied every major species, learning their weaknesses, their military capabilities, their psychological breaking points. Humanity had not been their ultimate target, just their first test case. They chose humans because we're isolated and new to galactic civilization, Harrison continued. They wanted to test their extermination methods on a species that other races wouldn't immediately defend. Captain Rodriguez entered the intelligence section, her uniform torn and bloody from the ongoing battle. The Krex are sending desperate messages to their home fleet, she reported. Something about code red protocols and sterilization procedures. Harrison's face went pale. I know what that means. If they can't complete the invasion, they have contingency plans. They'll try to destroy the entire planet to prevent their technology from being captured. How long do we have? Martinez asked. Maybe hours. They have antimatter charges on several of their ships. If they detonate them in the atmosphere, Meridia becomes uninhabitable for centuries. The battle outside was winding down as Project Prometheus continued its deadly work. But now humanity faced a new threat. Even in defeat, the Krex were determined to deny their enemies any victory. Dr. Hayes worked frantically at her computer terminals. I can modify the hunter machines to target their antimatter systems, but we need more time than we have. What? About their quantum communication system? Zethkar asked suddenly. If they're using it to coordinate the destruction sequence, can we interfere with it? Harrison looked up from his equipment. Theoretically, yes. But we'd need to understand their quantum encryption protocols. I might be able to help with that, Zethkar said. Valanian telepathic abilities can sometimes interface with quantum communication systems. It was dangerous and had never been attempted with Krex technology, but they had no other choice. Zethkar connected his mind to the captured communication equipment while Harrison guided him through the technical process. What Zethkar found in the Krex communication network was worse than anything he had imagined. The quantum links connected to dozens of Krex fleets throughout the galaxy. Each fleet was positioned near a different species' homeworld, waiting for orders to begin the next phase of galactic extermination. But more disturbing was what he found. In their central command structure, the Krex were not just following orders from distant leaders. They were part of a collective consciousness that viewed all non-Krex life as a disease to be cured. Their hatred was not political or territorial. It was biological and absolute. I can disrupt their communication network, Zethkar reported. But doing so will send a signal to every Krex fleet in the galaxy. They'll know their invasion force failed. What happens then? Martinez asked. They accelerate their timeline. Instead of taking decades to systematically exterminate other species, they begin immediate attacks on all 47 target worlds. The command center fell silent as everyone processed this information. Humanity's victory on New Meridia would trigger a galaxy-wide war that most species were not prepared to fight. We have to warn the Galactic Council, Turner said. With what? Proof? Rodriguez asked. We'll be telling them that humans used prohibited weapons to defeat an enemy they didn't know existed. Dr. Hayes looked up from her work on the hunter machines. There's another option. We can use the Krex communication network to send all the intelligence data we've gathered directly to the Council. Their own systems will verify that the information came from Krex sources. And then? Morrison asked. Then the galaxy learns the truth about what they're really facing. Over the next hour, as Project Prometheus completed its devastating work against the Krex forces, humanity made another choice that would change galactic history. They transmitted everything they had learned about the Krex genocide plans to every major species in the galaxy. The response was immediate and shocking. Within hours, the Galactic Council called an emergency session. Species that had been condemning human warfare tactics suddenly found themselves facing the same enemy humanity had been fighting. But by then, it was too late for half measures. The Krex, realizing their plans had been exposed, launched simultaneous attacks on 17 different worlds. Species that had never faced serious military threats found themselves fighting for survival against an enemy that showed no mercy. The difference was that now they knew what they were fighting, and they had humanity's example of how to win. Zethkar stood in the communications center, watching as desperate messages poured in from across the galaxy. The Altarian Confederation was requesting information about human guerrilla tactics. The Centauri Alliance wanted to know about improvised weapons. Even his own Villanian government was asking for advice on psychological warfare. "This is what you meant, isn't it?" Zethkar said to Martinez, "when you said the galaxy would understand why humans fight the way they do." Martinez nodded grimly. "Every species that survives the next few years will owe their existence to the tactics there, condemning us for today." 6 months later, Zethkar prepared his final report to the Galactic Council. The war against the Krex was far from over, but the tide had turned. Species across the galaxy had learned to fight like humans when their survival was at stake. The moral certainties that had governed galactic civilization for centuries had crumbled in the face of an enemy that recognized no morality at all. His report was simple and direct. The humans of New Meridia have been accused of war crimes for their unconventional tactics against the Krex Empire. After extensive investigation, I have determined that these accusations are false. The humans did not commit war crimes. They discovered the only effective response to an enemy that recognizes no rules of warfare. He paused in his writing, thinking about everything he had witnessed. The memorial field with its thousands of names, Sergeant Powell's sacrifice in the tunnel, the terrible weapons of Project Prometheus, the moment when humanity chose to become monsters to prevent greater evil from triumphing. The Krex Empire represents a threat to all civilized life in the galaxy, he continued. They seek not conquest or resources, but the complete extermination of every non-Krex species. Traditional military tactics and rules of engagement are useless against such an enemy. His final paragraph would be quoted. In history books for centuries to come, the humans fight like demons because they have seen true evil. They use tactics that horrify us because they face an enemy that cannot be reasoned with, negotiated with, or deterred through conventional means. If we ever face such darkness ourselves, we should pray that humans are fighting beside us, not against us. The galaxy owes its survival to humanity's willingness to sacrifice their moral certainty for our collective future. Zethkar transmitted the report and leaned back in his chair. Outside his window, he could see New Meridia's rebuilt cities and replanted forests. Humanity had won their war, but at a cost that would haunt them forever. They had become exactly what the galaxy feared they might become, and in doing so, they had saved everyone.